We're going to take a look at Activity 5 on the Total Eclipse Choice Board. This one is titled Totality Math, and it is aligned to math content. Activities 4, 5, 6, and 7 all align to different content areas so that if you teach reading, math, social studies, or science, you still have an activity for the eclipse that relates to your content area. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the title for that activity to open it. This lesson starts with the standards that are being addressed for science from kindergarten all the way through high school astronomy. You'll also see long-term goals, so what students will be experiencing as well as what you want them to understand at the end of the activity or lesson. Underneath those long-term goals, you have some common misconceptions that are addressed throughout this activity itself. You'll want to make sure that you address those with students beforehand and maybe circle back to them after viewing the eclipse, the event itself. Next, you have your teacher directions. So there is one activity for pre-K to first, maybe second grade students, and then there is a second activity for our third to fifth grade students. You have second graders that might also be able to complete this younger grade activity just based on where your students are. So on this first one, students will count the different suns, earths, and moons and create a bar graph for those three pictures. In the directions, they will color the sun's yellow. They've got one box that they can color blue for the earth and then gray for the moon. You can also color the actual pictures themselves before graphing them just to make it a little easier to see. And then you can ask students some different questions about the data that they have created on their bar graph. You might ask them how many more suns than, or how many more moons than suns are there? Are there any that are equal? You know, just kind of some comparative questions. You can also ask them, based on our data, how many total eclipses could we have? And see if they're able to gather that we need one sun, one earth, one moon in order to have a total eclipse. And so if we're counting from only these pictures on the left here, we could create 5 of them. If we're including these pictures down at the bottom, which you might have some students say, then you could create 6 of them. So just some different examples that you could use as conversation pieces with your students for analyzing that data. When we look at the upper grades, so maybe end of second grade, again, depending on where your students are at, definitely third through fifth, there is a frequency of eclipses passage for students to read. You can also, since we know this is a math activity, but you might want to get some reading in there as well, can also have them annotate this passage, highlight important information, key terms, color code things. And then after they read their frequency of eclipses passage, they will be completing this data table. And so what you're going to want students to do is look at the last total solar eclipse, the next total solar eclipse, and then subtract the last from the next to see how many years are between. For older students, maybe fifth grade, you could also throw in averages in there and have them see what's the average length of time in eclipses. So if I were totaling up all the years between total solar eclipses for each of these cities across the United States, what's the average year amount? And you might notice that some of them have giant gaps, like Houston, for example. There's a huge gap in years that you'll be able to experience in Houston. Smaller gap for Missouri, and we'll look kind of at that when we talk about the social studies activity. But those are also some things that you can draw student attention to. If you do also teach social studies, or even if you want to tie it into math, you could even talk about some of the like the distance differences. We know Dallas and Houston are both in Texas, but why is it such a bigger gap between when each of the total eclipses occurs? And so just, again, more conversation pieces. After finishing their graph and analyzing that data, they do have some questions at the bottom to answer.